before. The attempt to kill Hitler. One man prepared to act to change the world. Colonel Claus Graf von Stauffenberg.
He was a wonderful man. He was a rare, very rare mixture. A great idealist with a cool, precise intellect. He was masterful in action.
The attempt showed the world that there were Germans who weren't Nazis, who were prepared to stake their lives to overthrow this regime.
Who was this man who did what no one else dared?
When I was growing up, I never had to ask my parents, why didn't you do something? They showed that there were people in Germany with a conscience.
Berlin, January 30th, 1933. Hitler comes to power. The stormtroopers are on the march. The brown shirts parade in Bamberg, too, where Stauffenberg's regiment is stationed. Stauffenberg has no particular objection to the Nazi takeover. This aristocratic officer watches Hitler's progress with interest.
As a person, he found Hitler rather dubious right from the beginning. But he took a wait-and-see attitude towards National Socialism itself. In the early years, he certainly wasn't any kind of opponent.
By 1933, Stauffenberg has been an army officer for 7 years. He's considered highly talented, and he receives rapid promotion. The Führer has plenty to offer the army. A return to military power after the shame of Germany's defeat in the Great War.
And then rearmament began. An incredibly effective and powerful army came into being. People admired what he had done.
1933 is an important year in Stauffenberg's private life, too. In September, after a nearly 3-year engagement, he marries 20-year-old Nina von Lerchenfield in Bamberg Cathedral.
My mother was head over heels in love. It was an absolute love match. I know that she was an incredibly happy young woman, and she worshipped her husband.
Stauffenberg told his bride he'd had known from the first moment that she was the one for him. Nina von Stauffenberg will stand by her husband, come what may.
She was so loyal to my father, and trusted him to an extent that young women today would probably not understand.
Berthold von Stauffenberg at the age of 8, with his brothers Franz Ludwig and Heimerhand and their father.
We idolized him and we loved him. Of course, he was strict. Fathers were in those days. But what I remember most is his sense of fun and his warmth.
Stauffenberg's friends would later describe him in the same way.
I have rarely known a person who could laugh as freely and openly and as infectiously as Stauffenberg. And for me, that was a sign of his inner self-control in those times.
Claus von Stauffenberg came from an old South German aristocratic family. Castle Lautlingen was the ancestral home. Claus and his brothers spent much of their youth here. Their forefathers were chancellors and ministers to the kings of Württemberg.
His inner autonomy and independence, what you might call his nonchalance, was of course based on his consciousness of his family, of his heritage. But he was never condescending or arrogant towards others. Above all, this was a family that saw its role in the service of the state.
Noblesse oblige. No empty phrase for the Stauffenberg brothers. And a gentleman's education included an acquaintance with the arts. The brothers joined the intimate circle around the poet Stefan Georga. His work promoted a spiritual aristocracy. Its ideal, the German High Middle Ages. Nazi propaganda also used the Middle Ages in its vision of a better future for Germany. Perhaps it struck a chord with Stauffenberg.
At times he was a little uncertain about what the National Socialist movement represented, but at the same time it would be impossible for him, I think, not to hope that perhaps Germany would find its saviour, that perhaps Hitler would allow Germany to achieve its destiny somehow in the 1930s.
But what Hitler wants is war. By September 1939, he has it. The German army invades Poland. Claus von Stauffenberg is a supplies officer in the 1st Light Armored Division. Months before, he had warned a friend, the fool's going to start a war. From the first day of the Polish campaign, Hitler has shown what he means by war. A brutal conflict of ideology.
Then came the persecution of the Jews. From the beginning of the campaign, the SS and the Gestapo went on the rampage through the occupied territories with appalling cruelty. Some of us not only knew what was going on, some people saw it with their own eyes.
And Stauffenberg? In November 1939, he visits his uncle, Count Uxklu, who confronts him with reports of atrocities. Uxklu has close contacts with the resistance against Hitler. He insists that total disaster can be averted if Hitler is deposed and put on trial. He wants Claus to take part in a coup d'etat. Stauffenberg says he... Summer 1940. Hitler's stunning victory over France silences his critics. Stauffenberg at the mobile headquarters of the 6th Panzer Division during the German advance into France. This is Stauffenberg's victory too. He writes to Nina.
Dear Nina, they are utterly defeated, their army destroyed. This nation will not recover quickly from so heavy a blow.
Yet he doubts that Germany's victory can last.
How little is ever permanent. An abrupt change, or a complete reversal, is so much more likely than the current situation continuing, even for a few years.
In June 1941, the Wehrmacht attacks the Soviet Union. This too will be a blitzkrieg in the minds of Hitler and of his generals. 3 million German soldiers advance along the Eastern Front and into Russia. Once the campaign starts, Stauffenberg wants above all to win this war. Winter brings the invasion to a disastrous halt before the gates of Moscow. A furious Hitler removes most of the generals and makes himself army commander-in-chief. Behind the front, special units of the SS are continuing what they started in Poland, on a massively increased scale. Stauffenberg is now attached to the general staff. What he learns there fills him with revulsion.
I'm sure he knew a great deal, even if he didn't know everything. But he hardly ever talked about it. Just occasionally when we got together in a small group.
Stauffenberg decorates his office with a picture so that anyone who enters will see the expression of madness in Hitler's eyes. He tells a fellow officer that Germany's conduct of the war is criminal.
The most important discussions were the ones we had in the evenings, when we could quite openly ask each other, what should we do with a man like this? Should we depose him as commander on the Eastern Front? Put him on trial? Lock him up? They were all suggestions that had only a tiny chance of becoming reality. We were perfectly aware of that.
The war continues, and with it, the killing behind the lines. In August 1942, Stauffenberg tells a colleague,
"They're shooting Jews in their thousands. This must not be allowed to continue."
He begins collecting evidence for prosecutions after the end of the war. A month later, in September, Stauffenberg can no longer contain his frustration.
Hitler is personally responsible. Nothing can be changed until he's eliminated. It's about time some officer took out his pistol and dispatched the grubby little man.
January 1943. The German 6th Army is surrounded at Stalingrad. Hitler has forbidden them to surrender. On the 25th of January, the Red Army launches its final assault on the beleaguered Wehrmacht forces. This battle is the beginning of the end. This much is obvious, even to Field Marshal von Manstein. Stauffenberg believes the moment has come to persuade Manstein to join the resistance. On January 26, 1943, he reports to Manstein's headquarters. He urges Manstein to join a coup against Hitler. Manstein refuses. He tells Stauffenberg to apply for a posting on the front line. Stauffenberg insists. Manstein says he will arrest Stauffenberg if this doesn't stop. In February 1943, Stauffenberg is transferred to the Africa Corps. Things have become a little too hot for him in Army headquarters. The 10th Panzer Division is withdrawing as the Allies advance.
The air superiority of the enemy was unimaginable. There were Spitfires everywhere.
April 7th, 1943.
The commander had warned Stauffenberg, "You haven't got a lot of experience of attacks by low-flying fighters, so watch out. I'll give you one piece of advice. Get out of the car, look which direction the plane is flying, and if it's aiming for you, then run."
Und wenn es die Richtung auf Sie selbst nimmt, dann weglaufen.
We got out of the car fast, and the shells were thudding into the sand beside us.
Claus von Stauffenberg is seriously wounded. He loses his left eye, his right hand and forearm, and 2 fingers of his left hand.
I never again had a superior I would work for as willingly as Stauffenberg. That was a great loss for me.
It's almost a miracle he survives.
Papi,
4 months later, at home at Lautlingen.
It was a while before we saw him. He was in hospital in Munich for months. And the first time I saw him was at my confirmation. Our first reaction was one of relief that he wasn't dead, because so many people had been killed. The wound itself, the disfigurement, didn't worry us that much. You saw wounded people everywhere and amputees. And of course, they were all heroes.
Days of convalescence and reflection. Days of decision.
Stauffenberg clearly made up his mind the killing of Hitler had to be done. And he wanted to do this regardless of the fact that he had a family, he had a wife, he had children, he had people who depended on him. In the end, he had to say to himself, this is more important, the killing of Hitler.
Now, from autumn 1943, Stauffenberg meets regularly with other conspirators. He prepares a plan with Colonel Henning von Tresckow and General Friedrich Olbricht, not just to assassinate Hitler, but to overthrow the entire Nazi regime. Operation Valkyrie will use the reserve army to take over all the centers of the Nazi power.
The leading figures in the Third Reich would have to be arrested. The SS must be neutralized. You would have to occupy the radio stations. The concentration camps would have to be taken over, and so forth. Unbelievably difficult when you hardly have anyone. You can't put the job out to tender. Who's qualified to do it? Who wants to apply? You couldn't do that. The circle of the initiated was very small.
The Nazis will be attacked by their own forces. Operation Valkyrie is designed to crush an uprising against the Reich. The plotters have turned it on its head. The reserve army is to neutralize the SS and the security service and seal off the government district. By the end of the day, the army should control the Reich. June 6, 1944. A gigantic Allied armada lands in Normandy. The conspirators plan to call for a ceasefire, at least in the West, once Hitler has been killed. The plans for the coup are in place. Stauffenberg carefully recruits further conspirators. One of them is Lieutenant Ewald von Kleist.
I really liked that. He came straight to the point with no beating about the bush. He showed me exactly what was planned. And then we discussed the individual details. The assassination attempt was so important for me because it meant so many people would live, because the war would be stopped. That was clear. As to the chances of success, I was very skeptical. It really was very difficult.
By now, Stauffenberg has been appointed Chief of Staff of the Reserve Army, the perfect position to launch Valkyrie, and it gives him direct access to Hitler.
Haben Sie das Material bekommen?
Conspirators provide him with 4 pounds of plastic explosives.
At that time, no one else who was initiated, shall we say, could get so close to Hitler. No one except Stauffenberg.
An acid detonator with a time delay fuse. The success of the coup depends on a disabled war veteran with 3 fingers.
There was a huge risk in this, of course. He had to actually physically assassinate Hitler, but at the same time he had to go back to Berlin and organize the coup, the operation which was going to create a new regime.
Saying goodbye to his family. How much could he tell his wife?
She didn't know that he was going to carry out the assassination himself, but she knew perfectly well that he was involved. And they discussed it.
But there are some questions she doesn't want to ask her husband.
She trusted him implicitly. She believed that he would only do what was right, even if her own life was at risk. She asked him, what are the chances? He said 50-50. It was agreed. You must pretend to know nothing. One of us must be here for the children.
July 11th, 1944. This is the day. The place, Hitler's residence in the Alps, the Berghof. These pictures are from the beginning of the war. With the explosives in his bags, Stauffenberg travels to his appointment with Hitler. But SS Chief Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Goering are not at the meeting. Stauffenberg does not plant the bomb. Four days later, the Allies have pushed their way inland from the beaches at Normandy. Germany's defeat is only a matter of time. The Allies are advancing on 3 fronts, from the west, the south, and the east. Stauffenberg once again prepares to kill Hitler, this time at the Führer's headquarters in East Prussia. The Wolf's Lair. A memorable photo is taken on this 15th of July, 1944. Stauffenberg, controlled and calm. Nothing reveals his intentions. But at the last moment, Stauffenberg's co-conspirators call it off. Unless Himmler can be killed too, they won't unleash Operation Valkyrie. The evening of July 19th. The next day, Stauffenberg will have another chance.
It is time. Something must be done. Anyone who dares to act must accept that he will surely go down in German history as a traitor. But if he fails to act, he would be a traitor to his own conscience.
He went to confession before the assassination attempt. If you know that you're not only killing the tyrant, the man who must die, but are also dragging more or less innocent people to their deaths, That certainly can't have been easy for him. He couldn't have just shrugged it off.
It's a terrible burden to bear. The need to kill the few to save the many.
The number of war dead would have been approximately half as high as it finally was. And the cities that were destroyed after the 20th July would not have been destroyed.
Thursday, July 20th, 1944. Stauffenberg has 4 pounds of explosives in his attaché case. Takeoff from Berlin's Rangsdorf airfield. First Lieutenant Werner von Heften is on Stauffenberg's staff. He's involved in the plot. The tyrant must die.
It wasn't as though anyone could walk up to Hitler and take a potshot at him. That wasn't possible. There were a series of security zones, and access to Hitler was limited to a very small number of people.
It is nearly 5 miles from Rostenburg airfield to the Wolf's Lair. Stauffenberg has the highest security clearance at Hitler's headquarters. A compound of more than 2 square miles. The road to the inner sanctum passes through 3 security zones, each patrolled by armed guards. At about 10:30 a.m., Stauffenberg reaches the officers' mess in Zone 2. He decides to have some breakfast. Heften isn't hungry. They will meet later. Reserve Lieutenant Christoph Scheibler accompanies Stauffenberg after his arrival.
It was a really friendly, happy breakfast. Looking at Stauffenberg, you could never have guessed he was tense. He could hide it completely. I really admired that afterwards. He was so badly wounded that he needed help with his case. He couldn't carry his case on his own. Everyone helped him. And I asked him, why is it all so heavy? And he said, I've so much to do. Perfectly quietly and factually.
But then, Field Marshal Keitel delivers a shock. Hitler's Italian ally Mussolini is expected that afternoon. The briefing will take place half an hour earlier at 12:30. Stauffenberg is out of time. He needs to prime the explosives and activate the fuse. He warns Heften. Stauffenberg makes an excuse to slip into another room. The briefing room is prepared for the meeting. Heften and Stauffenberg have to prime 2 explosive packages with acid fuses. It's delicate work. The first fuse is activated and checked. The calculation is that no one in this room will survive. A sergeant is sent to fetch Stauffenberg.
Herr Oberst, beeilen Sie sich bitte.
Wir kommen gleich.
Their time is up, and Stauffenberg has armed only one of the charges. This is how the bomb is meant to function. Acid will spill out of the broken ampule and eat through the wire holding back the spring with the detonator bolt. After approximately 15 minutes, the bomb will explode. But there are just 2 pounds of explosives instead of 4. Kurt Salterberg is on guard duty outside the briefing room in the highest security zone.
We had been told only to do an identity check, not to search bags or look for weapons. He could have had a machine gun slung on his back. I would have let him through.
At 12:30, Stauffenberg enters the briefing room. Field Marshal Keitel informs Hitler that Stauffenberg has arrived and will report on the movements of the emergency deployment divisions. Stauffenberg is aware that in the summer heat, the bomb could go off minutes earlier than expected. He makes sure the bomb is close to Hitler. Then he makes an excuse and leaves the briefing. The case is moved to the far side of the table leg.
After about maybe 10 minutes, Stauffenberg came back. I noticed he wasn't wearing his cap or his belt, and I assumed, as often happened, that he was going to the bunker to fetch a file of some kind. There was nothing unusual in that.
Erich Kreitz is a driver at the Wolf's Lair. He's been given orders to pick up Stauffenberg.
I got changed quickly and drove to security cell in 1A. And I'd only just drawn up when he sort of came out of the bushes. Lieutenant Haften. He came up to me and asked if this was Stauffenberg's car. I said yes. I saluted and said, "Request permission to point out to the colonel that he is not dressed according to regulations." And then, of course, he said, "That's none of your business. Drive."
July 20th, 1944, 12:42 p.m.
All the paper, everything was flying around, splinters of wood from the windows. I ran straight to the telephone and raised the alarm. At that moment, Stauffenberg came by in the staff car.
12:44. Stauffenberg's escape route leads past the briefing hut.
Wounded men were streaming out, groaning and screaming with pain.
Stauffenberg is absolutely certain Hitler is dead. This is the hut after the explosion. Some of the blast pressure escaped through the open windows. If Stauffenberg had kept the second charge in the case, everyone in the room would have been killed, including Hitler. The heavy table leg diverted the explosion. Of the 24 men in the room, 10 were badly wounded. 4 died. Hitler was lucky. In his certain knowledge that Hitler is dead, Stauffenberg heads to Berlin. He now has to direct the coup d'etat. He will be out of contact with the conspirators for more than 2 hours. Every minute counts. By the time they touch down in Berlin, he expects that the coup will be underway. He is wrong. Crucial hours have been wasted. The Bendler Block in Berlin, headquarters of the Reserve Army. Only now is the order given to unleash Operation Valkyrie. The coup begins with the words, "The Führer is dead." The 22-year-old conspirator Ewald von Kleist is in the Bendler Block. He's the last eyewitness to the day's events.
Valkyrie had not been set in motion when he got there. It seemed to me he was pretty annoyed about that.
Valkyrie finally gets underway. It calls for the Reserve Army to occupy all Nazi positions of power. First signs are hopeful. An army unit is reported on its way to take over Berlin's SS barracks. Valkyrie's troops must now seal off the government district. Stauffenberg gives orders to occupy the radio stations and news agencies. But then a message arrives from the Wolf's Lair. Hitler is alive. Following the murderous attack on the Führer, army generals are attempting a coup which must be suppressed at all costs. Stauffenberg dismisses it as a lie.
Wenn Sie Keitel wären, würden Sie dann zugeben, dass Hitler tot ist?
Of course, the Nazis will pretend Hitler is alive.
I was sent out to check if the government district had been surrounded and the guards had been disarmed. That was a high point for me when I saw Adolf Hitler's SS guard disarmed on Hermann Göringstrasse. That was a very good sight to see.
Meanwhile, that afternoon, Hitler keeps his scheduled appointment to meet Mussolini. He gives him a tour of the ruined briefing room. Hitler blusters that divine providence has once again saved his life. In Berlin, the conspirators have sent troops to a crucial target, the villa of Joseph Goebbels. Major Ernst Rehmer, commander of the Berlin Guard Battalion, at first carries out the Valkyrie orders. Then he becomes suspicious. He tells Goebbels there's been an attempt on the life of the Führer. Goebbels puts in a call to the Wolf's Lair. A switchboard operator is listening in.
Goebbels briefly described what was going on in Berlin. And then he said, I have Major Rehmer here. He has orders to arrest me and to seal off the whole government district. I have persuaded him that you're still alive. And then Goebbels said, can I put Major Rehmer on? And Hitler said, Rehmer, do you recognize my voice?
Ich erkenne Ihre Stimme, mein Führer.
A turning point for the coup.
I hereby order you to crush any resistance with force and to liquidate immediately anyone who is not entirely loyal to me. Is that understood?
Jawohl.
Rehmer obeys his orders and immediately lifts the cordon round the government district. His guard battalion now secures the government district against the Valkyrie troops and moves in on the Bendler block. Now, events move very quickly.
Zentrale! Wir müssen hier raus.
They hurriedly gather up the files. Stauffenberg is shot in his left arm. But he won't give in. He calls Paris, one of the cities where the coup has partly succeeded.
Öffnen Sie. Draußen
He tells them it's over. Could it have worked?
It's a supreme drama. It's the possibility, the moment when this monster Hitler might have been killed. And he's not, and Stauffenberg and many others sacrifice themselves like some Greek tragedy in order to, as they see it, save the future of Germany.
In the courtyard of the Bendler block, a firing squad is drawn up. 4 conspirators: General Friedrich Olbricht, Colonel Merz von Quernheim, First Lieutenant Werner von Heften, Colonel Claus Graf von Stauffenberg.
One of my mates was told to position his truck with the headlights pointing at the walls. None of us, the lieutenant and I, had no idea what was going on. Till someone told us they're going to shoot some people. When you're so close to a person as I was to the Count, he treated me with so much understanding and warmth. I don't know what you think. The soul is sick. It suffers. Then he was shot.
On July 21st, Nina von Stauffenberg learns of her husband's death. She told the children that she had bad news. An attempt had been made on the life of the Führer. It was their father. She told them he had made a mistake.
Well, of course, we were completely stunned. My younger brother, who was particularly close to my father, couldn't stop crying, and I couldn't understand it at all. The Führer. And then my mother said, well, he believed he had to do it for Germany.
Die Vorsehung schützte unseren geliebten Führer.
Providence protected our dear Führer. She said that to protect the children, so that if they were questioned, they would have a phrase to repeat.
Dass sie das genauso wiedergeben.
Of course, we were completely confused. And then she told us that she was pregnant, and that night they took her away.
The Gestapo searched the house for information about other conspirators. Nina von Stauffenberg is arrested. Her 5th child, Constanza, is born in prison.
I'm sure she was afraid she would be executed. And then, of course, her great fear was the children. Would she see her children again?
They're taken to a Nazi children's home to be re-educated. The assassins' children are indoctrinated. Your father is a traitor. Their love was stronger than the fury of the regime.
I think we have to accept events as they are. He stays in our memory as he was when he died. And perhaps that's a comfort to us, and it's right that way.
What was the meaning of Stauffenberg's deed?
It certainly showed that not all Germans were rigid Nazis and supported the regime. There were people in Germany who had a conscience.
The war continued. Millions more died. Stauffenberg had meant to stop that. If only he had succeeded with his plan. When the war was finally over, all of Claus von Stauffenberg's family has survived and were reunited. The family of the man who tried to kill Adolf Hitler.